Well, welcome everyone. Today we have Daniel Pink, the author of Drive, uh, and the author of A Whole New Mind, and the author of To Sell is Human. And there are some other books as well, Dan, right?
Two more, Free Agent Nation and a book called The Adventures of Johnny Bunko.
The Adventures of Johnny Bunko, which is a manga kind of book, novel.
Right.
Yeah. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
Um, as we go in this interview most of the times, we want to get to know your story, your personal story leading up to this book. And I understand that you were writing a whole new mind, which led to Drive. So tell us your story and uh, um, the reason why you started writing the Drive.
Well, actually, I got interested in the topic, as you say, in this book, A Whole New Mind. And that book makes an argument that we're moving from a world of metaphorically left brain abilities, logical, linear, routine, algorithmic abilities, to a world of less routine, less algorithmic abilities that are metaphorically kind of like the right hemisphere of the brain, simultaneous, artistic, empathic. And in writing that book, one of the questions that I got was, how do you motivate people to do these more conceptual, creative tasks? And I didn't know. So I started looking. I knew there was this body of research on motivation, and so I started looking at it, and I realized that it said some really surprising things. It said things that I didn't know that really flouted a lot of the assumptions that I had, and that's really the main reason I got down the path of writing about motivation.
And in the book, you go along the three types of motivation. You say there's motivation 1.0, there's motivation 2.0, and motivation 3.0. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about 1.0 and then 2.0 and 3.0. 1.0 is all about survival. It's about our
Yeah.
most basic instinct. So um, tell us about it.
We eat when we're hungry. We drink when we're thirsty. We have sex to satisfy our carnal desires. It's part of what it is to be human. No question about that. It's integral to being a human being. But it's not the only thing. And at a certain point, when societies evolve, those kinds of motivations, of pure survival motivations, actually take a little bit of a back seat. Because if we want to do, if I'm just trying to get through the day to outrace that saber-toothed tiger, then those kinds of motivations are fine. But as societies become more complex, and you and I live in different places, or you're a different tribe and I want to trade with you, et cetera, we need slightly more complex social arrangements. And that's where motivation 2.0 comes in. And that's really just based on reward and punishment. Here's the thing, just to be super clear about this, the reward and punishment drive is an important drive that human beings have. It's essential. It's integral. We all have it. It's not like it doesn't matter. It is actually quite essential. It's part of what it is to be human. The thing is, it's not all there is to be human. And so as societies become more complex, what the social science tells us is that those kinds of drives, those pure mechanistic if-then kinds of reward and punishment drives, are insufficient for other kinds of tasks in a more complex kinds of relationships and more complex societies. And that's motivation 3.0, which is built around, at least in the workplace, around paying people enough and then providing some measure of autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
So the reasons why motivation 2.0 doesn't work is because it kind of takes away a lot of possible creative thinking, possible open-ended thinking. It kind of limits limits our focus. Is that what happens?
Yeah, although here's the thing. Let's be clear about this. Motivation 2.0 works, just not for everything. A way to look at this is, it's like sometimes sometimes it helps to sort of isolate on what kinds of rewards we're talking about here. Okay, so because there are all kinds of rewards. I'm getting a reward talking to you because it's an interesting conversation, and because maybe in the future someone will listen to this podcast and buy a book and I'll make another dollar in royalties. All right, so there's obviously so there are all kinds of rewards that we have. What I tried to focus on is this mainstay kind of reward that we use in organizations, what psychologists call a controlling contingent reward. I like to call that an if-then reward. If-then. If you do this, then you get that. 50 years of social science tells us that if-then rewards are extremely effective for certain kinds of things. Mm-hmm. For algorithmic work, where you're following a recipe, following a rule, could be with your brain, could be with your body. If-then rewards work really well for that. Mm-hmm. The problem is that if-then rewards, the same body of research tells us, are far less effective for more complex, creative, conceptual kinds of tasks. And so, to my mind, like if you're running an organization, that doesn't mean get rid of all if-then rewards. I mean, it means use if-then rewards where they work, but don't use them where they don't work.
Sure. Now, do you, so the three components of 3.0 are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And purpose is an interesting one because everyone has a different purpose. It could be so many different things to do so many different people. I'm going to take a story from my life personally, which was when in 2004 I lost my job. I was laid off from a job, and the challenge I had then was that if in 30 days I did not find another job, I would have to leave the country. I had something called an H-1B visa, which only allows me to, have the job, and if I don't have a job, I have to leave. So 30 days is all I had. Now that put a lot of stress. That put a lot of challenge in my system, and it put a fire in my belly, and it stoked the hunger, the desire. But it also was a reward and punishment kind of motivation in some ways. And the thing I noticed about myself was it was because of having that hunger that I was able to get other jobs and able to perform really well in an interview. If I didn't have that hunger, if I didn't have that desire, I was kind of flat when I went to job interviews. Otherwise, I just didn't have that performance that was kicking in at high gear. So how do we reconcile these notions of high performance under stress when rewards and punishment are under play, even though they are not necessarily cognitively simple tasks, they are cognitively really complex tasks, but only when the stress levels are high and you have something on the line or your hunger or desire are being challenged, then that's when you do something great or you do something.
Yeah, I would say that in that case, you were probably in 1.0 because it was survival. Mm-hmm. And so having that threat of having to leave the country is absolutely going to focus your mind. And so you're going to do whatever it takes not to be kicked out of the country. And so, I think that's about survival. And as I said before, you threaten. So it's in some ways the vocational equivalent of escaping a burning building. Mm-hmm. I mean, if your building is on fire, autonomy, mastery, and purpose are second order issues. The goal is to get out of the freaking building. And so to me, I think that you were in that role. Now, I don't think that if you keep hanging, if we keep that sword over you and say over time and say, if you don't perform at a certain level this month, you're out. If you don't perform at the same level the next month, you're out. I think that's going to absolutely erode your. I think that is absolutely going to erode your performance. But to me, your situation is akin to. Your situation is as much 1.0 as it is 2.0. It's akin to, as I said before, escaping a burning building.
Sure, but the thing that we talk about is the idea that when it's 1.0, when survival is at stake, then we're not really able to harness our complete intellectual prowess in some ways, or are we able to?
Well, it depends. I mean, here's the thing. It's pretty clear that that if-then rewards are effective in the short term, right? Mm-hmm. The research on that is very, very clear. Why? We love rewards and we hate punishments. They get our attention, so they do get us to focus. And so, at some level, you were absolutely and appropriately focused during that 30-day window. And so you were locked in, and there's a certain aspect of, not entirely, but there's a certain aspect of finding a job that is algorithmic. I mean, there are certain steps that one needs to follow in order to do that. So you were locked in on that. So I don't see I don't see a huge amount of irreconcilability here.
Hmm.
What I do think, I'm curious what you think. Like, suppose you had that threat hanging over your head every month. Do you think that would affect your performance?
Interesting thought, but somehow I feel that having that hunger and desire propels me forward more than it takes away from my.
Could be, yeah. Okay.
And that's why I was thinking about the
So
idea
why
of
podcast?
what's up.
Why are you doing this podcast?
This podcast is actually, uh, for me, it is for a lot of it is for learning, and like I love to figure these things out, and I want to be able to teach. But even more importantly, we have a business behind this podcast. We have a business where we're teaching entrepreneurs, and we're we're creating a platform, we're creating a marketplace, and all of those things are involved. But I agree, there's a lot of I do this because I enjoy doing it, but at the same time, I I'm also wondering if it was just for the sake of enjoyment, uh, would I have the same drive to um, go after things the way I would if it was for my hunger and my desire to do
Hmm.
something great, to do something meaningful. Now,
Yeah.
does that desire mean that hunger or desire
Well,
mean that?
the desire to do something meaningful to me is very different from the desire to stay in the country.
Sure,
I
they're
mean,
survival 1.0 and purpose kind of deal.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, I see where you're coming from in the question. I think that you're maybe a way to think about it is this. Maybe the way to think about it is that if you think about 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, they're not necessarily. It's like in a software upgrade. It's like you don't throw away everything else that came before it. You see what I mean? I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like this kind of this. It's not like this country starts here and
Hmm.
then this country starts here, and we use a totally different language and a totally different currency. There's some porousness on those borders, I think.
Yes, there's. I completely understand what you're saying here. There's these things don't necessarily like. It's not segmented. It's not compartmentalized kind of thing. It's not a gradation where you must always be on 3.0. There's times when you will be in
Yeah.
1.0 and 2.0. Um, and I think part of that. For example, an athlete, you often hear in a game in like sports, let's say that there's some bulletin board material because this athlete says, "Oh, you guys are not good enough," or "I'll beat your ass," and that becomes bulletin board material. It really becomes a big deal, and it really drives people to do better than what they would have done if they were just playing for the fun of it. Now, is that maybe it's not true?
Maybe
Maybe it's not.
I'm not sure that's actually I'm not sure that's empirically true.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
because what you have there is you have essentially a sample that's afflicted with survivor bias because you always hear the case of someone making a last second basket and saying afterwards, "Oh, they were trash talking me, and I was really inspired by that." But you don't hear the cases when they were trash talking, they missed a shot.
sure.
So I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying I'm skeptical of the empirical. I'm
We
skeptical of the empirical truth of it.
we don't have the scientific data on it, and maybe there are some people who enjoy that more than other, and maybe there are
I
some
think
people.
you're right. I think there's a good point. I think there are differences in. We're talking about at the moment how many human beings on the planet? 7 billion human beings on the planet. So it's not like everyone has the same set of motivations, obviously,
Yeah,
because of circumstance. And as you say, and I think it's a really good point, because of personality.
yeah,
But I don't think that and if you think about something like autonomy, mastery, and purpose, I mean I think that the science shows pretty clearly that they're fundamentally human drives. Now you might weight one more than the other.
hmm,
You might have a weighting of mastery more than I have a rating of mastery, or you know what I mean. So the fact that we have different weightings doesn't mean that doesn't mean that the underlying principles
yeah.
are off. But I think you make a good point that it's not as if it's actually not as black and white as one might
Yeah.
think it is if if one doesn't have a discussion like this that explores the nuance.
Yeah, it's almost seems like we all, or at least for myself, I'm going to speak for myself here. Like for me, the book has been a lot of fun because it's forced me to delve deeper into the way I think about what drives me, what
Yeah.
motivates me, what causes me to do what I want to do in life. And maybe we all have different switches at different levels, different proportions where they come into play and they allow us to become better, or they allow us to shine, or they allow us to really
Yeah.
do the best we can.
I think that's right. The other thing I would say is that again, we're talking 7 billion people, so there's going to be significant variation across that very large sample. I think one of the things, and I write about this a little bit in the book, is that there are changes. Forget about from person to person. There are changes over the course of an individual person's life, so that what drives you at a particular moment in your life isn't going to necessarily be the same thing that drives you at a later moment in your life. And so there's a mountain of evidence in developmental psychology on what's called generativity, which is that, excuse me for that bing, is a mountain of evidence in developmental psychology on what's called generativity, which is this phenomenon that when people age, get to a certain point in their life, generally when they're reckoning with mortality, that they actually begin to think in a much more purpose-driven way than they might have than when they say we're 20 or 25. Now, it doesn't mean when they were 20 or 25 they didn't care about purpose at all. But what it means is that the relative weight of all these things can shift, as I said, not only between you and me, or you, me, and Maria and Fred, but you as a 20-year-old, you as a 30-year-old, you as a 50-year-old, you as an 80-year-old.
Yeah. And so Motivation 1.0, which is like survival, as you said earlier, it's not a good thing if you have it hanging on you all the time. If it's like a sword that's hanging on you all the time, because that'll create burnout. Is that what we're saying? Like,
That's part of it, yeah.
And it's also not going to allow you to.
Here's a simpler way to think about it. If-then rewards. If-then rewards get us to focus. There's no question about that. We love rewards. Okay, for all the talk about intrinsic stuff, we still love rewards. We love rewards, okay? So they get our attention. They get our attention like this. Locked in, right? That's a very good frame of mind if you have a super short deadline for something, all right? Mm-hmm. If on day 31 I don't have a job, I'm out of the United States. And it's also good if you know exactly what to do. If you're working on something long term and you're locked in like this, it's actually not going to work very well. If you need something where for creative conceptual work you want a more expansive view, you want to see things more widely, going like this is going to work against you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And back for the benefit of our listeners, let's talk a little more about Motivation 3.0, which is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Maybe there's an order to it. Maybe there is no order. Is there one that is more important than the other, or how does it work? So
think of it as a circle.
It's a circle.
Books by nature have to be linear. It's really
books by nature have to be linear, and
life. Yeah, our days are linear, but conceptually, our life is not linear.
No, it's not. Let's talk about autonomy a little bit, especially because today, more than ever, we see people who chase that, who believe that it is possible to do what they want to do what they desire to do. Tell us about it.
Well, autonomy is really just self-direction. Do you have some sovereignty over the key aspects of your life? It doesn't mean you have absolute 100% sovereignty over every element of your life, every moment of the day. But what it means is that, in general, you have some degree of self-direction in your life. You have some amount of control over what you do, when you do it, how you do it, when you do it, who you do it with. And the evidence is pretty clear. When people have a little bit more control over those aspects of their work, they're more likely to engage. They're more likely to do better.
Yeah. There's a book called Top 5 or Top 6 Regrets of the Dying. And the first one is, I wish I had done what I wanted to do, not what the world told me to do.
Yeah.
So that kind of ties in directly with what you're saying.
Yeah, that's self-direction in a much broader, a much broader level. I'm talking.
It's a meta level, but still.
Yeah.
It's still like it's good to see that in some ways, in a bigger picture, the ideas come together. Um,
Well, I mean, you and your listeners should check out a book called 30 Lessons for Living, which is a book by a guy named Carl Pillemer, who's at Cornell. And what he did is that he interviewed, I think it was several thousand people in their 90s, Americans in their 90s, looking back on their life. What are the lessons that you've learned? And when it comes to work, these lessons are the lessons, again, anecdotally, that these thousands of older Americans give are very consistent with the principles of science that all these great scholars have surfaced.
Nice. I'm definitely going to check it out. It's on my list now. Love my books. The next one, mastery. And
Yes.
The challenge about mastery, I mean, it is difficult. It is not an easy job. And that's why it is essential in some ways, because it's a challenge. It keeps us going. Tell us about it.
Okay, so mastery is our desire to get better at stuff. We like to get better at stuff because it's inherently satisfying. When you take this to the level of the workplace, there's some great research from Teresa Mabule at Harvard Business School, who found that the single biggest day-to-day motivator on the job is making progress in meaningful work. So when we make progress, we're motivated. And so the problem is that, like, if you go back to the workplace, a lot of our workplaces don't have the architecture that allows us to see our progress, notice our progress, get information on our progress. So to me, that's the big barrier when it comes to mastery, is that our organizations aren't equipped to help people get better at stuff, help them see their progress, help them see improvement. We're still giving feedback to employees with annual performance reviews in a world of incredibly high metabolism feedback in the rest of our lives.
That's right. A quantification of that progress and like feeding back that progress on a daily basis, or like maybe it is important for us to self-direct that for ourselves and to say, yeah, that is where I am. Like, I am making progress.
And again, you mentioned athletes before. This is what athletes do.
Yeah.
I mean, athletes completely outsource the feedback. They, watch any great athlete. They know how they're doing. They keep a log of how they're, what they've done, how they've done it, trying to get feedback on their own. So I think it's a really important skill that we can learn from, that we can, I think it's an important skill for kids too, to how do you go out in the world and get your own feedback rather than wait for the feedback to come from you.
That's right.
Come to you. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you said, athletes really drill it down, and their coaches do drill it down too. You cannot expect the athlete to get feedback at the end of the year. They get it every hour.
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, imagine a professional athlete with an annual performance review. Okay, LeBron, let's look at your numbers now that a year has gone by. I mean, it's a joke, right? I mean, he would never get any better.
Yeah, exactly. In some ways, we have to adopt the mindset of these high performance athletes in order to be able to.
There is something to be said for that, particularly when it comes to mastery.
Yeah, and then the next thing, or the last thing, is purpose. Having that purpose, you talk about the idea. It's not just a purpose. It's not just like a purpose only for yourself. The purpose goes much bigger than that. It has to be much bigger than that for you to have the drive, right?
Well, you know what? On this part of the book, I actually wish I had a chance to redo it a little bit, because I've changed my view on this a little bit. So here's how I now think about it. So two ways to think about it. One is purpose with a capital P. All right, purpose with a capital P, and then there's purpose with a small p. Okay, so purpose with a capital P is: are you doing something big and transcendent, solving the climate crisis, feeding the hungry? Changing the world in that way. And I talked about that, and that actually is there's a lot of evidence showing that when you get people thinking that way, their performance improves. However, I also think there's another aspect of purpose, what I call purpose with a small p, lowercase p. And that's just, are you making a contribution? As I mentioned earlier, several years ago, I wrote a book called Free Agent Nation, and I interviewed hundreds of people around the U.S. who had chosen to leave large organizations to work for themselves. And one of the things that I noticed in the transcripts of the interviews is people kept saying the same thing over and over again, which is another reason I left is that I felt I wasn't making a contribution. They didn't say making a difference. And I think
Hmm.
I think there's a distinction between making a difference and making a contribution.
Hmm.
Making a difference is, the way I see it, is that capital P purpose. I am, feeding the hungry. I am, eliminating nuclear weapons. I am reducing dependence on fossil fuels. But not every job lends itself to that. And but I do think that people want a purpose in their day-to-day work. They want to know, like, if I didn't show up to work today, would anybody care?
Hmm.
If I didn't show up to work today, would that refrigerator manage to get off the production line?
Hmm.
If I didn't show up to work today, would there be customers who weren't taken care of well because of my absence? And that to me is making a contribution. Are you just contributing? Does what you do actually matter to the other people around you? And I think that, there's evidence showing that that's actually really important too. And I felt like I gave that a short shrift in the book.
So what we're saying, this purpose with the small p here, the idea of contribution, it could be something as simple as um, you have the purpose to make something happen at work. It doesn't necessarily have a grand scheme of things behind it, but something that that moves the needle at work, for
Yeah,
whatever it may be.
exactly.
Or could it be something also like my purpose or someone's purpose is to make sure that their um, parents' lives are better off?
Absolutely.
Is that a small p or is it a big p, or where does that lie?
That's a good question. I'm not sure where I'd put that. That might be somewhere. That might be somewhere. That might be somewhere in the middle. I'm not sure how I would. I'm not sure I would categorize that one.
And would that count for a good purpose that allows for your like that allows for drives like in the paradigm of drive and motivation 3.0, does that fit?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna. I don't have this. I don't have the wisdom to assess who has a good purpose and who doesn't have a good purpose. I mean, I think that if that becomes if your transcendent purpose is to take care of your family in some way, I think that would absolutely increase your conscientiousness, increase your diligence. Um, I'm a little agnostic on whether it increases your creativity, but
Hmm.
I think that would absolutely improve your performance more than reduce it.
Right. Yep. So I think we're coming towards the end of this interview. We've talked a lot about this stuff, but one of the things we always like to do is make sure our listeners have some specific, actionable stuff to take. So if you were to give 3 action items, 3 specific pieces of homework they could do, what would they be based on
For
this
just for
book?
individuals,
Yeah,
just for
based on the book.
individuals. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So we can do one. You want to do one for autonomy, one for
sure. Whichever
mastery,
whichever
one
you think
for,
is the most important. Like let's go with that.
it really, again, importance is going to depend on
These guys
the
are
person.
entrepreneurial. These guys want to create their businesses, are creating their businesses. Let's go
Okay.
with AMP or MAP or whichever one.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's go. So autonomy. One of the things I really like inside of companies is this idea of this small amount of dedicated time where people can do whatever they want.
Hmm.
So it could. Some companies, Atlassian, for instance, does what's called a ship it day, where 1/4 a month people have 24 hours to work on whatever they want. Other companies say 10% time. I wouldn't go more than 10% time.
Hmm.
I mean, Google, as you might remember, started out with 20% time and actually pulled back a little bit on that. It could be some people do genius hours, 1 hour a week. These guys who won the Nobel Prize do something called Friday evening experiments, where they take a few hours every week. But the idea is, in the course of people's regular work, the whole universe of people's regular work, a tiny little island where people have purely autonomous stuff, can experiment, can try stuff, can do stuff. There's a lot of evidence showing that can lead to great breakthroughs in creativity.
Hmm.
So again, don't go crazy. I would never recommend that I would not recommend that most companies do 20% time. I think it's too I don't think it really works all that well.
Hmm.
But I would recommend that every company do something much more modest than that, which is to carve out some amount of time, 1 day a month, 1 hour a week, whatever works for your situation, where people are purely autonomous, can work on whatever they want, can experiment and play and fail a little bit. So that'd be on autonomy. On mastery, Well, I mean, for these entrepreneurs, I would I would actually establish some kind of progress ritual for themselves and
Hmm.
for the team. One of the things that I do myself is I use something called I done this, which is both a where you get an email at the end of every day or a text at the end of every day that says, "What'd
Yeah.
you get done today?" And you just type in what you did, and it keeps a log for you. So each time it'll say, after over a certain amount of time, what did you get done today? 2 months ago, here's what you got done. 6 months ago, here's what you got done. There's or something like at the end of every day, take 10 minutes to write down 3 good things that happened to you.
Hmm.
Uh, so that kind of progress ritual where you stop at the end of the day and say and ask yourself and memorialize it, what progress did I make today? Can be very good in getting that self-generated feedback that we were talking about.
That's right.
That's a very simple one. And then on purpose, I mean, one thing entrepreneurs could do, depending on the size of their team, is they could just have a meeting and have everybody write on a card, what's the purpose of this company, and
Hmm.
then collect cards and see whether people actually know what the purpose is.
Hmm.
And that's a very simple, easy test of alignment. And I've done this with a number of companies, and it's interesting. Sometimes you see this really beautiful kind of harmony where people aren't saying the same words, but they're playing the same music. And you say, okay, everybody knows why they're here. And at other times you have this just complete cacophony. So I think that's this takes 90 seconds and provides a lot of insight. So I would try maybe something like that as well.
That's great, Dan. Thank you very much.
Good thing.
And before we close, please tell us how to get hold of you, where to find all your good stuff, and everything they can learn from you.
I just go to my website, which is www.danpink.com.
Great. Thank you, Dan.
My pleasure.
Hey guys, before you go, I just want to make sure that you're aware that we have a lot more exciting stuff on our website that you can access. For example, you can actually get into the mind maps that I use to create these videos, and these mind maps really help you understand the ideas and actually remember these ideas. So you can get a link to this, for example, this specific mindset, this mind map of the millionaire fast lane, and you can click through all the good stuff, and this will really help you remember, and you can even create a PDF out of all of this. So you know the website, head on over to www.2000books.com. Here it is again. Just want to make sure you're aware. It's www.2000books.com. Make sure you get there, because that's where you can get access to all these amazing mind maps of all these different books. And I also put PDF of the key ideas and exercises and all that stuff. It's a free resource for you guys. I want to make sure you learn all that you can from all the amazing books we have here. So check it out. Okay, talk to you later. Bye bye.